This is sort of the other side of that question, in that the notion of religion as an accelerator of political polarization is nothing new. We've got a few millennia of examples of how that works, whether we're talking about Ireland or the Hundred Years' War. This is not a new phenomenon where religion becomes politicized and becomes a kind of our team versus their team situation. And I guess the question here is, in this, and I think there's a lot of people outside of religious communities that think religion is what's driving the polarization, whether it's about things like abortion or immigration, or they become these wedge issues in people's sort of churches of choice, for lack of a better word, but kind of their kind of religious identity. Is there a way, in this climate that we're in? I mean, we could get into a dissecting of why that's always been, but I think it's kind of an ancient tradition that it's not a new phenomena, that people of faith who are kind of see themselves in different camps, let's say liberal and conservative Christians, for example, can find common ground to be the brakes instead of the accelerator. Are there ways? Is it sort of too late? Have we just gone too far, and we're now at the tipping point where either on this side of the political line or the political line, or are there avenues in communities of faith and across faith as well? I mean, talking about Jewish and Muslim communities, for example, interfaith connections. Is there still an option where those folks can find common ground to be able to kind of rein in the extremes within their own groups?
Yes, I definitely think there is. And I think it requires a couple of conditions, though. And one is that it's very dependent on the faith leader of a particular community. If he or she sees it as something desirable and beneficial, that person is much more likely to explore those kinds of connections. If the faith leader feels under siege or the community isn't stable, then the question, of course, is why rock the boat? And where I've seen faith leaders most willing to work with one another is if there is an existing relationship of trust that has been built up maybe years earlier around lower stake issues. And one of the things I've seen with Black-led faith communities, for example, is I was working on a project a few years ago that was started by Ebenezer Baptist Church and St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Atlanta to do a Lenten book study. And so you had a majority Black congregation and a majority white congregation reading very sensitive books about hot button topics around race and how that plays out in our society. And they were doing this in a faith context. And they had this amazing experience where a lot of the white participants had these revelations as a result of reading about these searing experiences that their Black counterparts had lived in or were still living. And there was an interest in spreading this project and having other communities do it. And a number of the places around the country where I was in communication with other Black faith communities or people who were organizing with them, we got back responses along the lines of, yeah, we get asked every so often to do these projects to make white people feel good, and then nothing happens. And we're sort of tired of being used that way. That was, they were very polite, but that was essentially the message. Now, between St. Luke's and Ebenezer, they had had a history of doing things together. And in fact, as a result of these book study projects, the predominantly white people at St. Luke's had formed various projects to do research into economic inequity, criminal penalties, and legislating and advocating around that. Right? There were several things where they actually took action. So their existing relationship between those faith leaders of those two very different churches created the groundwork to have that kind of trust. But when you're talking about something as sensitive as political violence, then people, unless they have a trusted relationship with a faith leader, maybe don't want to wade in. So that's one condition, is whether there is somebody that they can work with. And I think the other is that um, they have to see it as they're having some skin in the game. One of the, our project, as you know, sees the work as having three components. One is dealing with people who are already radicalized too and willing to use violence. One is trying to stop the ongoing radicalization of people to use violence. And the third is trying to change norms. And if you are somebody who sees yourself as not wreaking violence and not engaging in it, it's very easy, even if you're a person of goodwill, to say, well, this has nothing to do with me. I'm not violent. I'm not advocating violence. And so it's much harder for people to see their connection to this work. But as you and I both know, some of the communities we've dealt with in this project who have been most open to working with us, it's because either people in their community were the target of hate, or some aspect of that faith community's mission became the target of hate. And so they then realize that, yes, this is something that affects them, even though they themselves don't see themselves as central to this issue of extremist violence. So that's the other condition I think that has to be present. And then just overall, this question of how do you build trust? I mean, we've seen in our own team, we're sort of a microcosm of what this project is about, because you might be really liberal, somebody else might be very conservative, somebody else has a different perspective, and we're all working together on this common goal. But it doesn't mean in our personal views that we've somehow renounced them. I mean, you're probably still just as liberal as you were, and somebody else is as conservative as they were. But what's changed is that we've built up enough trust with one another that if somebody were to say something that we disagree with profoundly, we probably would be curious to know why they think that or what brought them to that. And that's happened, that change or that bond, that underlying willingness to see that there could be some reasonable reason why somebody views things as they do, is born of now years of working together. And so how do we foster that same sense of curiosity and trust, I think, is a really fundamental question. And it requires a lot of time and patience. And we're seeing that in the work we're doing and the progress we're making. It's very incremental and often not super sexy, but it's having those moments of being in community with one another where somebody says, like when Ryan gives one of his trainings, where people get this aha moment because they see its relevance to their work, and then maybe it opens them up to another step in connection with somebody different from them. And so it's like we have this net with all these really big holes, and we're trying to knit the holes tighter and tighter so that there's more connectivity and resilience there.
Yeah, I like that. And I've noticed that even in my own interactions with my conservative friends who normally I would be ready to go toe to toe and argue to the finite point. And then I think, well, when Miles and I are talking, we're talking about what this project that we have in common and what we're working. We're not like trying to best each other over who's, got more points on this particular topic.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've been exporting some of these skills that, I joke about what would Ryan do frame of mind that I like to go into, and it's probably saved me a lot of time pointless arguments with people.